Well, good morning, Dr. Moore, and good morning, everybody joining us here today. I'm Morgan Roberts. I'm an account executive with BibliU, and joining me here today is Dr. Jamillah Moore. She is the Vice President for Student Affairs and Enrollment Management at San Francisco State University, and is former college president of a number of different schools that she will be sharing with us in just a moment. But has that personal connection to the community colleges in the California area. Dr. Moore, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Good morning, Morgan and the BibliU team. Thank you all for joining us this morning in the higher education community. I am Dr. Jamillah Moore, as Morgan indicated, Vice President for Student Affairs and Enrollment Management at San Francisco State University. And I have a wealth of experience in higher education and have come out of the community college system just a few years ago. And so I'm just excited to be here with some of my community college colleagues to talk about this important product with BibliU. As Morgan indicated, I am also the former president of Kenyatta College in Redwood City. And prior to that, I was also serving as the former president of Los Angeles City College in Los Angeles, California. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join you.
Excellent. We're so glad to have you this morning. And the way this will work, just a quick introduction of the agenda. We will talk about the specific budgetary constraints that California is facing coming up. And then we'll also talk about some solutions related to that. So just getting into this a little bit, Dr. Moore, could you tell us a little bit about what the overview, what it looks like with these budgetary constraints right now that California is facing and what that means for your fellow colleagues?
Thank you for that question. If we can go with the first slide. The California state budget for January, or actually second slide then. There we go. Forecasts a significant $11.3 billion decrease in state education funding for the fiscal year 24-25. But let me pause for a minute because I just want to give a little bit of background. The California community college system is the largest higher education system in the nation. It has 116 community colleges. It serves more than 2 million students. As an open access system, it really is kind of the first and foremost opportunity for many of our students to have access to higher education, and it helps to shape and change lives for students and for families. So it's an incredibly important system when it comes to providing access and opportunities to so many deserving Californians. So in January of this year, when Governor Gavin Newsom introduced the state budget, many of us found out quite quickly that there were going to be significant impacts to higher education. The forecast was a significant $11.3 billion decrease in state education funding for the fiscal year 2024-25. The drop is part of a wider budgetary challenge actually faced by the state, stemming from various economic setbacks, including delayed tax payments due to flooding, declining home sales, a downturn in Silicon Valley startups, and reduced incomes among the wealthiest Californians who are major contributors to the state revenue. So while the state of California in previous years had surpluses, we are now faced with a huge decline. So when the 2023-24 budget was approved last June, lawmakers were already aware of potential economic issues, but lacked concrete data. And what led to that was, as the state payment deadline had been postponed from April all the way to October, consequently, the state experienced a sharp decline in revenues, contributing to a projected overall state budget reduction of about 6%, which is about $291.5 billion for 24-25. So if many of us recall, we had that pushback and delay of submitting our taxes because of all the flooding and what was happening with climate change. But that impacted the state budget, and so it really didn't catch up with us until January. So leading to an expected $37.9 billion deficit. So the general fund expenditures are also anticipated to fall by nearly 8%, totaling $208 billion. So that's kind of the roadmap of how we got to this space right now. Next slide, please. So the Legislative Analyst's Office is estimating a looming $68 billion deficit for 24-25, a little off from where Governor Gavin Newsom is, with an annual operating deficit projected at approximately $30 billion through 2028. So the Legislative Analyst Office is anticipating that this budget shortfall for California will continue into future budgetary years. But despite these financial challenges, the proposed budget will be subject to extensive negotiations over the next 6 months in the California legislature, with final adjustments likely influenced by revenue updates due in June. Many of us in higher education or in the budgetary system who are aware of it, we remain optimistic because we're hopeful that when the May budget revision, or May revise as we call it, comes out, may offer some solutions to stabilizing funding for higher education. But right now, the legislature is doing its job through the budgetary process, through conference committees and things of that nature, to try and work out these differences. And what that requires many of us to do on these campuses or working in higher education is to look at ways of how we can continue to provide access to resources to continue to sustain quality education and to serve our students. Next slide.
Thank you.
There's no other slide, sorry.
I'll go back, I'll stop sharing though, back to us for a moment. So this is significant. This has significant impact on faculty, administration, and quite certainly students. Can you talk a little bit about how it specifically impacts the academic success and the student success and the services that are being provided?
Sure. So Morgan, as you know, we have several community college campuses continuing to do the great work that they're doing now with limited budgetary dollars. So what we see happening is many of those on campuses, counseling, outreach, what we see those budgetary constraints looking like, or maybe a reduction in offered programs and courses. So budget constraints often lead to colleges prioritizing which academic programs to maintain, reduce, and or eliminate. Programs that are expensive to run but have lower enrollment may face cuts or restructuring as some options or choices. This can lead to a decrease in the variety of courses offered to students. Other constraints that will impact are class availability. So financial limitations might lead to either larger class sizes as colleges try to accommodate the same number of students with fewer resources, or additionally, there might be fewer class sections available, leading to challenges for students when registering for required courses and potentially delaying their graduation. So there may be an impact on completion. We also can anticipate cuts to faculty and staff. So with reduced budgets, community colleges might not replace retiring faculty and or reduce the number of adjunct faculty members, because once again, they're trying to still provide access to resources with limited budget. So this reduction in faculty and staff can affect the level of student support services, such as tutoring and counseling. We also may have a situation where some campuses may move to shift more to online education. So to save costs on physical infrastructure and to reach more students with fewer resources, colleges might increase their reliance on online courses. So while this can make education more accessible for some, it may also disadvantage students who lack reliable internet access or prefer in-person learning environments. So this will be decisions that individual campuses will have to make based upon the needs of their constituency. In looking at student support services, budget cuts often force colleges to reduce expenditures in this area, which is sorely needed, which include mental health counseling, career advising, and the most important one, I think, is financial aid resources. So these cuts can adversely affect student retention and success, as these services are critical to supporting students' educational and personal development. Last but surely not least is impacts on equity and accessibility. So as we know, budget cuts can disproportionately affect vulnerable student populations, including low-income students, minorities, and first-generation college students. So reductions in programs and services that support these groups can widen educational inequalities. So understanding these impacts can help in evaluating the broader effects of budget constraints on the educational mission of community colleges and their ability to serve their student population effectively. So that's just to name a few.
Yeah, and Dr. Moore, this is exactly why we wanted to come together today. I mean, this is a real situation that is truly affecting higher education at every level. And there's way, like, you're either saving money or spending less, or you've got to find it some way. And this is a time where I think we are asking people to get more creative and to really be thinking about those students who are naturally most disadvantaged by some of these. So I love just having a conversation of what's really happening, what's going to be happening even more that we need to pay attention to, we need to address before it becomes an even bigger problem, and finding ways to do just that. With the materials and the limited resources that they're having, what are some of the approaches that you're seeing right now that are having some impact that we want to continue doing what's working, we want to do less of what's not working, and something in the middle, right? Find some new and different ways of addressing some of these issues. But could you talk a little bit about that? What schools right now are doing that are working?
Great question. I think what some campuses or some districts are doing that I think is phenomenal is really leveraging open educational resources. So colleges, I think, can expand the use of OERs, as we call them, which are freely accessible, openly licensed text, media, and other digital assets that are useful for teaching, learning, and assessing, as well as for research purposes. So this can drastically reduce the cost for students, as those resources are often available at no cost. And so a student, for example, would simply be enrolled in a course, would link into that course into their Canvas shell, and all of the information and material they would need for the course is already uploaded into the Canvas shell. And not what I think is great is there are many districts within California community colleges that are really looking at OERs, and I think that's one way. I think another way I think some districts and campuses are looking at are partnerships with libraries and online platforms. So strengthening partnerships with public libraries and online platforms can provide students with more access to free or low-cost resources. And we saw a lot of this work, Morgan, during the pandemic. And so while we were trying to navigate and the challenges of the pandemic, it really allowed us to be much more, as I would say, much more strategic in pivoting to other opportunities where we could meet students in their needs and where they are. So partnerships with libraries and online platforms also can, like an OER, give access to free and low-cost resources, but libraries can also facilitate remote access to academic databases and ebooks. So even if, as we talked earlier about some who are first gen or low income may not have access to all of what they would get on a campus, what I've seen some campuses do is to link up in their partnerships with public libraries in the communities as they're designed to do, so that you can meet students and meet the needs where they are, and also continue a great partnership with the public library. I would also say another is digital lending and resource sharing. So implementing programs for digital lending of textbooks and technology like laptops and tablets, once again, we saw a big boost in this during the pandemic, can help students who cannot afford these essential tools. So even though we are post-pandemic, a lot of these tools and resources are still being utilized. And I think that in that areas, it has helped to increase access. So colleges might also consider creating a system for inter-campus resource sharing to maximize the utility of available materials. And some campuses are already doing this as well, increased utilization on federal and state grants. During the pandemic, we had access to HERF dollars and other types of resources from both the federal and the state, but colleges also can utilize grants that can guide students in accessing available federal and state educational grants, which can be used to purchase textbooks and other course materials. So those are just a few.
Excellent. That's a great place to start. I think you're right about the pandemic, and during COVID, we advanced probably 10 years faster than we would have otherwise technologically, and the things that we're now able to consider and to do. And as a software company, this is what we were designed to do, in terms of find the problem and solve it. Right? We're not just creating things for the sake of creating things. There are real problems, and that changed during the pandemic, and things are different now than they were a few years ago. But a lot of the problem still remains the same. The cost of textbooks is too high, and it's not always accessible to the students that we need to reach. So that's a perfect segue to talk about some of the solutions, because we do want to be solution oriented. As we're talking about all these big numbers and these huge deficits and these awful things, this is where you get to be, it's like good cop, bad cop, right? Like you get to tell us the bad news. I get to tell you the good news.
Yes.
But I think truly we do want to be solutions focused, and we want to make sure that we are talking about and to the right people about the right students and the right solutions for them, because it's different in all situations. You talk about internet access. For some, that's an issue, and for some, it's not. We want to resolve that for everyone. So I will go ahead and share my screen over here. If you give me just one moment. All right, are you looking at my screen? Are you seeing that?
Yes.
Are you seeing the
I
scary
can see
pie
it.
graph
Yes,
that was
yes.
there? Okay, let's just advance through this. So this is where, we came in, and our sole purpose for existing is to enhance student success, right? So we're all here for the same reasons, and we all do this in very unique and different ways. And by providing content to students is how we do it. It's our little corner of the world that we can contribute to student success. And we feel, when we say we want it to be equitable, we mean all students, regardless of their financial ability, regardless of all of those barrier to entries that we're trying so hard to reduce. But when we say equitable, we know that that means they need to be affordable and the content needs to be accessible. So you will hear that throughout everything that we're talking about, right? We need to make it easy to find. Like you talked about having it, you log into your Canvas shell and all your books are there. We don't want students running around looking in all different places, and faculty having, those OER, which is such a great resource. That can be very time consuming to find those resources and figure out where they're going to live, and students are trying to access them. So throughout, what I want to make sure that I really emphasize is affordability and accessibility. So making it easy to find and affordable, because quite frankly, when it comes down to making those decisions, which students are going to be needing to make more than ever, as some of these, some of the funds are running out and schools are running at a deficit, and they're needing to make decisions in different ways for different reasons. Some of that is going to fall on the shoulders of students. And right now, 65% of students are not purchasing their textbooks, which is alarming until I talk to my own kids. And having put 3 kids through college, I come to this with a lens of the cost concern as well. But my background also is in teaching, and I come to it with the lens of faculty and a teacher, and really making sure that students are getting what they need. So 2-part in what we're looking at here. The affordability piece of it. And I am happy to jump into this and talk in more depth with anyone who would like more information. This is going to be a very just a high level overview of what some of these solutions that we've been talking about today look like. The affordability piece. Digital is predominantly a less expensive option for students. So anytime we're able to do that, we can save them 30 to 50% off of the traditional print price, typically. So this is something that, as we're looking into more innovative ways to reach the needs of students, not only can we get it to them at a lower cost, but it's immediate access. So that day one access to content is also really important, especially when you talk about, students are having to make decisions based on the cost of their books, or there's fewer courses offered because we're, cutting faculty and courses and things of that nature. So we want to make sure that the courses they're taking, they have the content, they can find it easily, and they can afford it. So that immediate access is also important for late enrollment, students that are switching classes, things like that. So we can talk more about that. And having it easy to find, the accessibility of it. We want all content to be on one platform. We want it to be easy. We want it to be in one place. We want them to know exactly where to go to get what they need, and they're ready and they're prepared. It's no surprise that when students have the content they need for their course, they're more likely to be successful. And as you talk about, retention is a huge piece of that big pie, right? If we're losing students in schools, that's expensive. If students aren't completing, that's expensive for them. So having access to their content, they're more likely to be successful. The auxiliary revenue, this is one where we say you have to either save money, spend less money, or there are some big changes that are coming. So we do have the option of auxiliary revenue in particular cases where that makes sense, that we can talk more about. But through those bookstores, whether running the bookstore is profitable, breaking even, or losing money, decisions need to be made. So we have the ability to run bookstores. We have the ability to add an auxiliary revenue onto that to help support other student activities. The simplification piece of it, this is where this is what software companies are designed to do, make things easier. There is cost savings associated with simplification of and automation of workflows. There are cost savings associated with students, are they getting their books? Are they staying enrolled? Are you retaining them? So there's a lot of the simplification that goes into that. FAFSA, financial aid, that's a whole conversation in and of itself, which we won't get into today. But it certainly plays into this whole conversation of budgetary constraints and what this means for students. What we can offer is, as part of this conversation is the fact that we integrate into your SIS, making it easier to get the financial aid information where it needs to go. So how we're able to do this, we are fully integrated. We can run bookstores. We can do everything from A to Z in terms of content delivery. Why this matters, some of our competitors in the big box stores, they don't own the platform that all the content resides in, which means they're outsourcing to a third party. What does that mean? Why do you care? Why is it important? That's a cost savings that we have because we do everything in-house. So that cost savings is passed on to schools and ultimately students. So that's why that matters. And again, like I mentioned, the technology that helps to save money and add efficiency is the fact that we integrate into the LMS. So as you talked about, when a student logs in, all their books are there. We can connect to the student information system and their single sign-on. So all of that together means that it's easier, it's more affordable, it's streamlined, all the things that we're talking about today. The adoptions tool, this is something I am super excited about, and maybe it's my background as a teacher, maybe it's my experience knowing what the adoption process looks like, which is going to change with these budgetary constraints as faculty are having to make different decisions than they once did when there were funds available to support it, or whatever the case may be. The adoptions process is something that traditionally has been a nightmare from what I can gather. And this is something where I think we can at least make people's lives easier through the adoptions tool that we have, that again, I'll discuss in great length at another time, but just knowing that there are some of these technological advances where small things make a big difference. There's a huge deficit that we're dealing with. There will be some huge cuts and decisions and things like that, but there's going to be a lot of small incremental decisions along the way that can have significant impact. So just to give some examples of schools and what schools are doing, we have a case study with Jackson College in Michigan. And this is a school where we don't claim that using BibliU is what impacts student success, right? It's what BibliU is. We are a platform. We make it easy. We make it affordable. The case study, it's it's a correlation study. So it's saying that students that are using BibliU have increased, and I'll show you all the data in just a moment, have increased their graduation rates, their overall grades, their retention, all of the good things that can be very costly if not done well. And with Jackson College, we've seen these correlations. We have a 19-page study that I'm happy to send anybody for a little late night reading if you want some light reading for you. But I'm also happy to show you the Cliff Notes version of what this looks like. So having access to affordable materials, I believe, is what has, and at day one, right, having immediate access to it is what has resulted in such phenomenal gains at Jackson College. And they've been a customer, excuse me, for about 4 years now. So their GPAs went up significantly. Their score went up by a whole grade point average. So when you talk about students really needing to maximize their experience in higher education, this is where it happens, right? It's in the classrooms with what they're doing. They're more likely to persist when they're successful. 77% retention, that was up, I think, about 15% from before they were using the platform, that's pretty significant. And like I said, the persistence rate increases. So I can send this study to anyone who's interested, but just recognizing it's working. We're finding some really great results with students having day one access to content. For OER, which is a huge conversation and one that needs to continue, this is a wonderful way of reducing cost of materials for students. So we host OER on our platform. It shows up just like any other ebook or courseware would. So it looks the same. They have the same experience that they would with an ebook. And they also have the same access to data analytics, which I can talk about at length at another time. But just having that information of that usage information of what students are doing that you get with digital is pretty remarkable, and you can be much more efficient. So when you talk about the cuts to student success and counselors and things like that, the ones that are retained, you want to make sure are as effective as they possibly can be. Their workload is going to be tremendous. We need to automate things. We need to make it easier. And the one thing that I will also add about OER, which is a really important distinction, is the fact that once it's digital, it's on our platform, it's ADA compliant. So this is a huge barrier to entry for faculty that are writing OER that want to be thinking of the content and not how they make it accessible to students. But because it's in a digital version on our platform, it's ADA compliant, and that's a big deal. So not only do students have the same interactive ability and access to data analytics, they also, you check off a big box in terms of things that are non-negotiable that have to take place, and that's being ADA compliant. So I'm going to stop sharing here and just, if my mouse wakes up, I'll stop sharing. There we go, back here. So there's a lot, right? There's big problems. There's lots of solutions. There's a lot of different ways that we can handle some of the day-to-day pieces of it through content delivery. So I love having this conversation. I think it's really important. And I think it's going to become increasingly important. Do we have any, I don't know if you were able to, and I should have mentioned this at the beginning, so apologies for not, there is a chat feature. Regardless of if you're used to using Zoom, Google Teams, all of that, there's usually a chat feature, but it always looks a little bit different and it's located in a different place. So if anyone has questions that they'd like to include in the chat box, we can go ahead and address those. The impact study has been linked up there. Thank you to my team for doing that. And Jamillah, anything, Dr. Moore, that you'd like to add in, or that I've missed, or that I need to address?
No, thank you for that, Morgan. I think you covered all the high points. I think one of the things that's really important that I would maybe just want to remind folks again is that when you indicated that what BibliU provides is all encompassing, you said how some folks can go to a bookstore, the bookstore may have to outsource to do this, that, and the other. I think you had indicated, you may just want to elaborate if you can, how the platform itself allows from beginning to end for students to have access to what they need for the classroom. And I think that's really important in the area of access and retention.
Yes, thank you for asking for more clarification on that. Because we are able to run the bookstore, there's cost savings involved in that, just because if there's a problem, BibliU fixes it. So there's no going, back, is it a publisher issue? Is it an LMS issue? Is it where's the issue? Where do things break down? It doesn't matter. If there's a problem, BibliU fixes it. So there's huge cost savings involved there from financial standpoint, and also time. There's a time savings in that as well. If you don't, there's a lot of decisions that are being made right now. Do we need the bookstore? Do we want the bookstore? Can we repurpose that space? So schools that I like to say, like, let's take if you don't need the bookstore, you could do an e-commerce link, you can get your books digitally, but if you still want that physical space on campus, it can be the campus, the campus store, and not necessarily the bookstore. When you remove those books from the shelf, what could you do with that space? Maybe it's a place for counselors. Maybe it's a place for tutoring to take place. Maybe it's a place there's so many different ways that you can reutilize that space. That can be a cost savings. It can be, we've seen things turn into an additional classroom, or turn into a vending machine. And maybe there's, an ice cream machine there. And that's giving students that sense of community and bringing them back to a localized location. So whatever the case is for the school, and I think every school is in a different situation depending on how many campuses they have, how big they are, how spread out they are, things like that. But to be able to run the bookstore, to be able to transition away from a bookstore, to be able to provide an e-link, an e-commerce link. Those are some different ways that we can meet schools right where they are with an eye and to help you transition to where you want to go. So that transition can also happen at any rate. It could be a quick, overnight. Okay, not overnight. My team is not going to want to hear me say it's not overnight, but it can happen quickly, or it can be a gradual change depending on the personality of a school, which they all have different characteristics. Does that answer your question a little bit?
No, yes, it does. Thank you for that.
Okay. And it's exciting to see. I mean, when we start thinking about when we have to do things differently, and we're sort of forced into that, because change is hard. We know this. I mean, let's acknowledge change is hard. We tend to make the most of it when we have to. So if by choice, maybe we don't want to make some changes. But when we're forced into it, that's also an opportunity for innovation and change and improvement. How can we do things better? How can we be more efficient? How can we just do things in a different way? And I think having that conversation where we've seen so many different schools in so many different places with different, scenarios and situations, we've seen what they've been able to do. We would love to share that. So here's some ideas. You start throwing those ideas around, you get new ideas, you get, so different ways of thinking about things. So I think that the conversation is really important. We've started it here today. Not that other conversations aren't happening, but having started this conversation, I think is a great place to begin. But it doesn't stop here for sure.
Great.
So I don't know if we have any other questions on here. Anything in the chat? I will say we are available, both Dr. Moore and I, to continue the conversation, whatever that looks like. If you want more information on the platform, if you want to see the data analytics, which I think are pretty exciting. If you want to see what that looks like and what our platform looks like, please reach out. I think everyone has, you registered for this, so they can find us. And also to reach out to Dr. Moore. I think you've been such a great advocate in recognizing how BibliU and a digital first solution can really impact schools and how they're doing business, and most importantly with these budgetary constraints, how we can work with it and around it and through it in all different ways.
Yeah.